Hey guys, Callie Price here. I'm just going to do a video to walk you through how to mitigate Zoom bombers, how to set up your meetings where you can change the password and send that out to students, change it before each class day. I'm also going to open up a practice Zoom where I have users joining in, and I'm going to act like they're bombing my classroom and some of the steps that you can take to remove them and kind of control that a little bit. So I have a few things I'll start with. First, if you change your meeting password right before class starts and only post that password right before class begins, that gives the students less of a chance to share that password and leak it on social media and then have students bomb or random people bomb your classroom. So what I'm going to do is I would click on my class meeting link that was pre-set up for me by the university. And if I want to change my password, I just click edit and it's going to take me to my sign in on the Zoom webpage. And it's gonna pull up that meeting ID. So this is for, my 010 section. I can see the day and time, and then it has a passcode. So I would want to change this each day before my class begins. So I'll just choose a random password, 49376, just as an example. I also want to enable a waiting room here. That way I can only let students in that I recognize, and decrease the chances of a bomber coming in. So I have a passcode set. I also have a waiting room set. I turn off video for participants as well. Mute participants on entry. I do not enable a join before host, or that could let people in before you're there. So make sure you do not check that option. And then you'll want to scroll down and save. I also recommend to go to your Zoom settings right here on the left and click on the recording tab here. And I would check off, make sure this is not checked, record gallery view with shared screen. I would also do this because if a bomber does come in, they could be doing crazy things on their screen, and you don't want to record that in your class recording. As far as pre things that you do to decrease the chances that a bomber comes in, those are the settings that I use. Okay? And now what I'm going to walk you through is an actual meeting. So let's say that you go to start your class meeting and you're trying to get students into the Zoom. And what if a bomber comes in? So we're going to simulate that with some of my practice Zoom bombers. I almost forgot to mention that if you are changing your passcode, you have to make sure that you share the new meeting passcode inside of your Canvas or however it is that you are communicating with students. So this was the meeting that I changed. And so I would want to take that passcode there. And I prefer to put it in my Zoom page where students are joining. And so right before class begins, my students know that I will post the password, just a few minutes before class is set to start. I typically do, 5 minutes or less, I'll post the password. And so if I just click edit on my page here, I'm going to copy the password for that specific class date. And then each class date, I would change that, and students know to always look there. I like to add it personally to their calendar. So if today's September 1st, it'll just push it up there for them to see very clearly inside of their Canvas. And so they know to look there. I've got them into practice to looking there right before class begins if they're planning on joining by Zoom. So now what I want to do is go to my Zoom Bomber practice, and let's say that this was my class that I was getting ready for. So I do my regular class start right here. It's connecting. And as the class is starting, you can see here that I now have a waiting room where people are starting to join. Okay, so now what I want to do is look at my waiting room. Just make sure I'm still recording here. Good. All right, so now what I want to do is pull up my waiting room here. And you can see that I have my practice Zoom bombers who have agreed to come and bomb my Zoom. Some of them are going to act as students. And if I had a small class, then I could sit here and just admit one student at a time. However, if you're teaching a very large class like myself, then you're likely going to have to admit all. I admit all because I want to be able to lock that meeting fairly quickly after I begin. And so that's what I'm going to do here is admit everybody at the same time. It'll say that they're joining. All right. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
We have Lane still connecting to audio. Shelly, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so I am recording this session so that other people can use it. Can I just get a yes that you're okay with me sharing this recording? I'll go through each one of you just to make sure that you're good. So Lane, are you good with this being recorded? Okay. Brian, you're good? Okay. Dakota, are you good with this being recorded?
Yep.
Michelle, aka Shelly, you're good with this being recorded?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, cool. So now you can see that these would be my students, and I had let them all in at the same time only because I would normally have a really large class and it would be difficult for me to let just one in at a time. If you have a smaller class, that's great. You could admit one person at a time based on their first and last name and that it matches your roster, but you may not have that luxury. You may have such a big class that you have to let them all in quickly. Once you let them in, though, I give my students a cutoff time. So if they're not there within the first few minutes of class, I tell them I'm going to lock the meeting so they won't be able to join after that, and they could always watch the Zoom recording later. So down here on my screen, I'm going to click this security tab that is on my Zoom tools down here. Once I'm confident that I've got everybody in, I can click this security tab here and press lock meeting. Okay, so that would be my first step in trying to cut off the ability for Zoom bombers to come in. However, if I admitted everybody in, or if a bomber came in and had kind of tricked you into letting them into your classroom, they could quickly slip in within those first few minutes. Once I lock that meeting using that security tool, if I notice that a bomber is here, I could then remove them and they won't be able to come back in. If you don't lock the meeting, they could just continuously come back in over and over and over. So I highly recommend that you lock that meeting, and then once you boot them out, they're gone. Other things that I like to disable, kind of at least at the start of the meeting until I'm comfortable that I don't think a Zoom bomber is there, is down here on my meeting controls. I disable the chat because a bomber could come in and write some pretty awful things in your chat, and that would highly disrupt students that are also in that chat. So in my security tab again, I uncheck the chat. I also uncheck the ability for them to rename themselves because a bomber could come in and then just pick one of your students' names and rename themselves if that option was checked. So uh, uncheck that option too. So big thing, lock the meeting once you've got your students in, disable the chat until you're comfortable that a bomber isn't there, and do not check the ability for them to rename themselves. That'll help you find them a little bit easier. Okay. So how am I going to know that a bomber is in? If I was teaching my class right now, I would be going on, and then randomly, some random person in the Zoom will typically start making noises. If they have their video on, they may show some obscene things on their video, and it's highly disruptive to the classroom. So I'm going to act like Brian's my bomber just because he just looks suspicious, and I know he's always ready to disrupt what's going on in the classroom. And so let's say that Brian was my bomber. Brian, if you unmuted yourself, can you speak real quick? Oh. Yeah, so I could hear Brian, and I'm like, oh, wait up, hang on a second. He's making some noise. That shouldn't be happening right now. Now, there's a few things that you can do right off the bat. If before you're worried about searching for Brian. If you have a lot of students, right, your gallery view trying to search for them could be pretty hectic. So one of the things that I do is make sure that I do not allow students to unmute themselves for a second. Let's see. Okay, so if this was your university meeting, in the security tab, there would be an option here to basically check where nobody could unmute themselves at the moment. So I would check that off. That way, if a bomber was being extremely disruptive, that would at least cut off the sound until I figured out who my bomber was. And so I've identified Brian as my bomber. And so if I go to his tab here and click the toggle button, I can then go down and click this remove button here. And so when I put the remove button, it says, do you want to remove Brian Scoggins? Once removed, Brian Scoggins will not be able to rejoin the meeting. So I'm going to click remove, say, see ya, Brian, and he's out. Okay. So again, as long as I had my security feature of checking lock the meeting, once I've removed Brian, he can't come back in, right? So that's going to be the biggest tool. You know, it's not 100%, they're not going to get in, but at least you now know how to remove them if they were to get in. All right. So that's all I got. Those in my Zoom meeting, my practice bomb meeting. Thank you so much for coming, and I'll be happy to share this video later, okay?
Yay.
All right, bye.
Bye.
So that's just a summary of what you would do to mitigate some of those risks and keeping those bombers out. I'm happy to share any resources with you that I find if I find other things that may work later.